I don't get it. What is this? What the hell are you guys doing here again? At the end of the day, is this a hospital or a passageway? Where's the paperwork? Where's the policy? Why do I have to deal with all this all the time? Michael was in a bad mood again. And when he learned that another homeless man had been brought to the hospital, to whom the sensitive nurses were giving first aid right in the corridor, he got even angrier. The whole staff knew how much the head doctor was annoyed by such patients, but they could not help themselves. Sometimes it seems as if he has no heart, the nurses and orderlies whispered among themselves when they saw Michael throwing out of the room another homeless man or poor woman, forced to wander the streets and basements. You have no right. We are obliged to help everyone without exception. Because we are a city hospital, not a private center. Sometimes the most courageous dared to interfere, but everyone knew the consequences of such attacks on the head doctor. The very next day, these people were expected to be debriefed and then dismissed. So few dared to stand up for the poor people. Do we have to? Not obliged, Michael waved it off. You're the ones who come here for a paycheck? I know what it's worth. You can't even imagine how hard it can be sometimes to get one extra penny of funding if we're going to spend our resources on this all the time. Helping every cross-section of vagrants we meet, then we won't have the capacity to treat normal people. The courage that day was shown by Adriana, one of the most principled caregivers. She was never ready to put up with the state of affairs in the hospital, and some nurses were sometimes even surprised that she hadn't been fired yet. The sink is ours. Today again with Michael clashed, whispering women in the corridor, overheard shouting, standing outside the office. I'm telling you, their relationship has long since gone beyond work. Otherwise he wouldn't have let some molting woman strip his mouth like that, the other nurse said enviously. They themselves would have been happy to speak out against the lawlessness that had been going on in the hospital for years, but seeing the unenviable fate of their colleagues, they did not dare to do so. Yes, but the reasoning of a simple ordinary nurse, entering the shower room and seeing a huge dirty stain, it's a pain to mess with. Then we'd still have to find a job to pay off the loans. After all, it's not for us to wash here, and the sick will somehow tolerate it. They're not sugar-coated. Many employees regularly wondered where the money received by hard work from the chief physician goes, but no one dared to ask directly about financing. Michael did not like it very much when subordinates stuck their noses into important, as he thought, unaffordable. It was neither in their minds nor in their level of development. What are you doing? Adriana exclaimed when she saw the head doctor pushing the helpless vagrant off the bench. You can see he needs a transfusion right away. He could drop dead right here. What do I care? Michael yelled back. The main thing for me is that by the time he, as you put it correctly, he will not be on the territory of my hospital. So don't just stand there like a statue. You better help me. When he turned the back of his head toward her, Kathy swung with all her might and hit him on the head with the IV. Michael immediately fell to the floor, and the frail girl picked up the still conscious man under her arms and dragged him toward the exit. Can you walk? She asked, seeing how he clutched his sides with a handkerchief. Who do not know you so and do not know? Didn't see your face. We should call the police. I have a car parked nearby. I'll take you to another hospital, but it's about 20 minutes away. Hold on. Adriana saved every paycheck for an old used car. It was very inconvenient to get to work every day by public transportation from a small village. In winter, she often had to wait several hours for the bus to arrive. The girl was afraid of getting sick and losing a good income by the standards of her life. The city hospital really paid well, and Adriana even seriously thought about saving money for a down payment on a mortgage, so that in a few years she could buy at least a small room and move out from her scandalous mother. Betty had never been known for her calm and quiet disposition, and in recent years the woman's character has completely deteriorated. All the anger and resentment she placed on her daughter, who had nothing left but to tolerate the constant scandals of her mother. Because Adriana had nowhere to go. I've been pulling you all your life alone, the woman said, when Adriana once again came home from work. I thought that you would grow up to be a man, find a normal job, and you. But how do you plan to live your life? You're completely incapable of doing anything. You don't make any money. Man, don't you have any? You think you're going to sit on my back all your life? No, darling, you won't. At a certain point, Adriana even stopped arguing with her. She knew there was no truth in her mother's reproach. Ever since she got a job, she had been paying the utilities equally. And sometimes Betty was no stranger to taking groceries from her daughter's shelf. Adriana pretended not to notice. She didn't want to scandalize her mother over such trifles. After all, she was right, she thought to herself. She alone has been pulling me all my life. She has the right to live off her. I owe it to her, not she to me. Betty had indoctrinated her daughter with these thoughts, over the years nurturing in Adriana a deep sense of guilt and insecurity. But contrary to her own expectations, the girl had no intention of taking her mother on full support. Therefore, as soon as the woman started talking about quitting her job, Adriana immediately began to discuss the division of the apartment. I pay you for 2 catty. Never in my life, do not divide. Betty shouted in rage, annoyed that her daughter had the conscience to talk about such things. And by the time you buy a mortgage on yours, 100 years will have passed, then to throw that money into your account. You should be helping your mother. By the way, the mother who spent her whole life denying herself everything for your sake. I never got out of the hole. Also because of you. Betty is used to blaming everything on her daughter. And if in her childhood she was shy to insult Adriana directly and tell her about her life, then when the girl grew up, the woman stopped being afraid to offend her or hurt her in any way. I want you to know that you did not live up to my hopes, she said to Adriana when she found out that instead of going to school, she finished her courses and got a job as a nurse in a hospital. I thought you were capable of something in this life. You're just the dregs of society. Then Adriana was deeply hurt by these words. The girl almost cried when she listened to her mother's insults. She didn't understand why Betty hated her so much. I'm her daughter, Adriana reasoned to herself. I'm the closest thing she has to a mother, and she treats me like I'm some kind of leper. Adriana couldn't understand her mother. There was no one to question her motives for her behavior. Her grandmother had long ago repented in her grave. She had never seen her grandfather. Like Betty, her mother too raised her daughter alone, but never allowed herself to reproach her for anything. In time, Adriana came to terms with it and stopped paying attention to her mother's invectives. All the girl's thoughts were occupied only with work. She seriously considered becoming a doctor when she realized that she liked to help people. And she had learned a lot at the hospital. But she could not afford so many expenses on her own. Therefore, the preparation for entering the institute remained a pipe dream for the girl. She was content with the fact that she could work and earn relatively normal money, which was enough for a modest, but quite decent life. She struggled to get the vagrant into the car, who by the time they reached it had already started to lose consciousness. Adriana rushed to the other hospital, where the doctors treated the patients differently. Why had they taken him there by ambulance in the first place? Muttering nurses everywhere. A man on a gurney down the hall. You could see he was in a bad way, and there's no one there to help him. Where they brought him, they brought him. What's there to say about it? Adriana answered. You better tell me this. Will he survive? Is there any chance? How do we know? The nurse asked in surprise. The doctor's coming, he'll figure it out. He'll need a transfusion, that's for sure. But why are you so pressed for him? You don't give a damn about that tramp. You saved a man's life, you saved a man's life. It's a good thing. Why worry so much? Adriana said nothing and sat down on a hospital bench and waited impatiently for the doctor to come out of the operating room where the wounded stranger had been taken. She realized that she had better not go back to work. Nothing good awaited her there. But after the doctor informed her that the man had a good chance of survival, Adriana went to the hospital anyway. She had to talk to Michael. There was no other option. Here comes our birthday girl. Nurse Christina said wryly as soon as she saw Adriana. The girl more than others ingratiated herself to the rigid and unfair and the chief doctor, trying to please him in everything and always. Are you crazy or what? Are you crazy? Michael's head is spinning. Barely came to his senses. Almost killed a man. You crazy asshole. Where is he? Indifferently asked Adriana, who was least interested in the man's condition. You didn't even show your face to him? Christina exclaimed indignantly. You're not stupid yourself. You should realize that after this you have to go to the street and lose your job. And there's no other job. Word will get around the hospitals. Don't worry. Michael praises you so much that they won't even let you near the hospitals. Without reacting to the nurse's words, Adriana walked towards the head doctor's office. As she thought to herself, the asshole had already come to his senses. Good, I'll talk to him now. She burst into the office without knocking, to which Michael didn't react. He was too weak to make a scene. So when he saw Adriana, he immediately took out a pen and a piece of paper from his desk and handed it to her and said, "Write your own letter. You warmed me up a lot, and for such a thing it would be good, of course, to make a statement on you. But I won't do it. I have neither time nor desire for all these squabbles." "That's not why you won't do it," Adriana replied wryly. "Not at all. Don't lie to me, and certainly not to yourself. If it were up to you, you'd have me not only thrown out of here, but put me in jail. But I can also write a number of interesting statements to several authorities at once. For example, I can raise the question of why the showers are still in such a terrible state that it's not just to wash there, it's even disgusting to go in there. They have not been repaired since Soviet times. Why new equipment has not been purchased yet, although money has been allocated to us. There are many other interesting things. You realize you can't buy everything. You're not a fool. That's exactly why you should write your own letter." Michael grumbled unhappily under his nose. "Of course you can start shaking your rights now and send me away, and continue to go to work as if nothing had happened. But you're not stupid, either, and you know I'll find a way to get rid of you anyway. You and I can't work in the same hospital." Adriana did not want to lose her stable and well-paid job. But she was also tired of watching the constant violations, of knowing that the head doctor was brazenly embezzling the money intended for the hospital and patients and keeping silent. The girl was disgusted by what was happening around her. Therefore, having written a statement, she immediately went back to the hospital where the stranger was taken. "Where is the head doctor's office?" Adriana asked. "I really need to talk to him." "What do you want?" answered the nurse, with whom she accidentally bumped into in the corridor. "We only have an appointment with the head doctor, otherwise you can't get in." "I would like to talk to you about a job," Adriana replied. "I'd like to apply for a job as a nurse. You should go to the personnel department, not to the head doctor." The nurse explained Adriana the way. And in 5 minutes the girl was already sitting in the office of the personnel specialist, who, without asking her a single question, immediately said that she could start working. "Sanitarians we really need. A constant turnover in months cannot work, constantly dismissed. It is unbearable." The woman frankly shared with Adriana the problems with the staff, and after listening attentively, the girl thanked her and started working the same day. By the end of the day, she looked into the room of a man who had barely managed to pull from the other side of the world. "I should at least find out what his name was," she thought to herself. "Oh girl, how nice to see you," he muttered as Adriana entered the room. "I was so embarrassed that I didn't have time to thank you for saving my life." "Save your strength," Adriana replied. "It wasn't me who saved your life, it was the doctors." "Thank them. All I did was help you get to them." "I'm sorry I didn't ask. What's your name?" "Ethan." "Me," the man introduced himself. "Except I haven't had an ID in years. You saw I'm a bum. No money either. I don't think they'll keep me here long. I'll be out on the street in a week. Who'd want me? So if you remember everything about yourself, why don't you restore your documents?" Adriana asked in surprise. "Why don't you start living normally? Why don't you find a job? Why don't you get a place to live? I understand if you lost your memory, but you remember your name and patronymic. Go to the police, they'll help you." It's a rhetorical question and a very long, unhappy story. Let's not talk about sad things. But the hospital will report you to the police. They must report that you have a criminal wound. You didn't stab yourself in the side with a knife. Right? And then the documents can be restored. I really don't understand you. If you want, I can help you. Ethan didn't know what to say to Adriana. He didn't want to go back to his old life. He didn't know how to start a new one. "Thank you, girl," he whispered. "You have a good heart. May all be well in your life." After 3 days at the new hospital, Adriana was in for some serious trouble. When the head doctor came up to her in the corridor and called her for a conversation, the girl thought that she just wanted to get acquainted with the new employee. But everything turned out to be much worse. Adriana could not even imagine how strong the influence Michael has on colleagues. "You should realize that," said the woman with the stern face. "I'd like to leave you, but unfortunately I can't. You can't work for us." "But why?" asked the astonished Adriana, who at that moment wanted to weep at the injustice. She guessed that Michael had a hand in what was happening now, but she didn't dare to say it out loud. "I think you realize that," the woman said with a sigh. "You resigned of your own accord, but that's the official version, so to speak. And the fact? Well, you yourself understand. As they say, there are rattles in every hut, and you should never take it out of the house. Of course we're treating your patient, but you can't work for us. I'll pay you for the days you've worked at the house. And then, well, you know what I mean." Adriana was shocked by this injustice. The girl realized that now the roads to all the hospitals in the city were closed to her. She would never be able to get a job as a nurse again. At that moment, she wanted to catch the mean and vile head doctor and tell him everything she thought about him. But Adriana realized that this would not solve her problem. She went home depressed and broken. And when Adriana didn't go to work the next morning, Betty gave her daughter a scandal. "What about you?" "Is this still on?" said the woman without knocking, entering Adriana's room. "Did you decide to take a vacation?" From surprise, the girl jumped up on the bed and, seeing her mother in the doorway, immediately threw on a robe. That day she had indeed overslept. Adriana didn't plan to break the routine because of the dismissal. She was going to look for a new job right away. "Mom, I was fired," she answered calmly. "But don't worry. I'm not going to sit on your neck. I'll start looking for a new job from today." "Fired?" the woman asked in astonishment, pulling her eyes out. "What kind of dumb, talentless person do you have to be to get a nurse fired? And what did you do?" "Probably, as usual, you had the most to do. And your tongue was your enemy." Adriana didn't want to share what had happened with her mother, so she decided to keep quiet. But Betty continued to pester her daughter, and there was nothing left on the line but to tell her everything that had happened. She was willing to do anything to get her mother off her back. But that morning Betty got up a whole hour early, so she had plenty of time to scandalize her daughter. "That's what I thought," she exclaimed. "Do you want more than anyone else? What kind of person are you, so stupid and useless? I'd say you're even a bit talentless. Why do you always meddle where you're not asked? Why don't you just do your job? What do you care what goes on in that hospital? I don't care if cockroaches jump out of the toilet. It's no big deal, but it's always been like that. Who cares about some provincial hospital? You don't give a damn about this miserable justice. Whoever got better from it. You're a fool, Adriana. You don't know anything about life, and you're still on the edge of your seat, having packed in a matter of minutes, because there was no more time left, because Betty preferred to spend it on a scandal with Adriana." The woman headed off to work. For the first time in a long time, Adriana was alone, and she had time to think not only about her current situation, in which she found herself by coincidence, but also about the future. After sitting in the room in front of the window until about 2, Adriana started calling for job openings. She planned to spend the rest of the day traveling, going to job interviews so she could get home late and not get into an argument with her mother. "But what job did you find?" Betty asked when her daughter got home. "I did." Adriana answered quietly and went to bed after locking herself in her room. She found the sales position less attractive than the nursing job, but there was no way out. Adriana didn't want to scrub floors anywhere else but the hospital, and she didn't know how to do anything else. The owner of a small clothing kiosk thought that the girl could be trusted with sales, and out of desperation, Adriana agreed to take the first job. Where was she willing to go? "Look at me," sternly threatened a young woman about 50 years old. "I have to keep an eye on the customers. If you steal even one thing, I'll give you a hard time. You'll work here for free for life." Adriana did her best to keep an eye on the people coming into the store, which they didn't like. "Young lady, it's like you're not focused on picking out a jacket for me, but on making sure I don't steal anything. Are you even going to work?" Adriana faced such criticism every day and several times. People were annoyed by the indifference and strict supervision of the saleswoman. At that time, Adriana did not realize that no matter how much she watched over things, there would still be people who could easily steal the clothes they liked. I understand if they stole some cheap jeans, the landlady said after taking inventory. Okay, I'd forgive you for some stupid caps or sweaters. It happens, you can't keep track of everything. But how could you not notice that down jackets and jackets with fake fur are being pulled out of the store? Those are the most expensive items. Each one of those jackets is worth 3 or 4 days of your work. Are you blind or what? Adriana didn't know how to justify herself to her mistress and couldn't even remember when and who could have stolen those stupid jackets and down jackets. Accepting the fact that she would have to work for free for a whole week, working off the owner's losses due to the stolen jackets, Adriana continued to go to work. She was able to go to Ethan's hospital only after a week. By that time, she only had money left for traveling. Adriana didn't want to get into a piggy bank, so she gave up daily car rides. The store was not as far from home as the hospital, so she decided to take the bus to save money. But how are you feeling? Adriana asked, entering the room. I brought you some fruit and homemade food I cooked especially for you. Thank you, thank you. Ethan, where have you been so long? Why haven't you come to see me? Don't you work here anymore? He figured it out all by himself, how he knew, and that the girl was in all this trouble because of him, and he felt guilty. Yes, you heard right, Adriana replied with a sigh. I won't be able to work in hospitals anymore, but that's okay. I've already got another job. It's all my fault, the man muttered. It's all my fault. What's it got to do with you? You think you're the only one? If there were dozens of people like you brought to us every day, it's just that no one has ever risked dying in our arms, especially not by choice. It's one thing when he went out, cut alcoholics on the street, although it's not good, because every person deserves help. And it's quite another to wound a wounded man who simply won't survive. Still, I would have left sooner or later. I can't stay in this shithole any longer. All right, we're not talking about me and me. How did you come to see me? From the police? Yeah, Ethan sighed. They said they'd help me get my passport back. All day long he had been thinking about the conversation he had had with the policeman. He couldn't think about anything else. I checked your data, the policeman said when he came to the hospital 3 days after their first meeting. And to tell you the truth, I'm very much surprised how you ended up on the street and drinking for so many years of vagrancy. I mean, you have a grown son who's a man in his own right. His past is, shall we say, nuanced. But there's nothing wrong with him now. Why didn't he come looking for you? Why didn't you go to him? To be honest, I have more questions about you than answers. Ethan didn't want to go into details about his past life, nor did he want to tell the policeman that he was on the street because of his son, to whom he had devoted his whole life, who had thrown him out of his apartment and threatened to take their lives if he dared to come back. He was afraid of his son to the point of shaking in his knees. Benjamin was feared by everyone. He did not put anyone in anything, not even his own mother, who tried in every possible way to avoid communication with him. Almost immediately after the divorce, the girl remarried and went abroad, and when she came back, did not even inform her ex-husband and son about where she lives and what she does. Benjamin found her himself, and it was not only unexpected, but also frightening for the woman. She didn't know what had happened to Benjamin, but when she saw her son, she immediately guessed that he had not only been to a place not so remote, but was now a gangster. Don't worry, assured her husband, who had returned to the country with her to open a chain of stores. I'll find a solution for your freak. Tomorrow he will calm down and never bother us again. The husband kept his word, and Benjamin never appeared in their lives again. Ethan, on the other hand, was much less fortunate. When Benjamin was incarcerated, the man couldn't find any place for his poor parenting and what had happened to his son. He blamed himself and regularly visited him in prison, bringing him handouts, but in no way expected that in the time Benjamin spent behind bars, he would turn into a badass gangster with opportunities and connections. But what's up, Pops? Here I am back, exclaimed Benjamin, arriving home from the zone. Only you're gonna have to make room, because I'm not back alone. There's nowhere to go as a kid. You don't leave a brother behind, as they say. Ethan was shocked when in the apartment besides Benjamin came 5 more men who were completely out of hand and who knew only one way to survive robbing and stealing. Every day they threw loud parties, and when they ran out of money, they took whatever they could get their hands on, as if it belonged to them, and took it to the pawn shop next door. For several weeks, Ethan looked at everything that was going on with his sleeves up, hoping that Benjamin would come to his senses after his time in jail, come to his senses and do something about it. But when the man realized that every day his son's behavior was getting worse, he decided to have a serious conversation. Benjamin's with him. How long is all this going to go on? Ethan asked his son sternly. When will you start living normally? When will all these guys move out of our apartment? They should have their own homes, their parents, after all. They're not going to live with us forever. But all the man heard in response was rudeness. Benjamin was not going to change his way of life, and his father's opinion on this matter did not interest him at all. No, Daddy, you're the one who has to get out of here. It's easier to decide, Benjamin replied. And we will stay here. So come on, Shura, and pack your things while I'm kind enough to let you pack them and not put them on the stairs. Ethan tried to put his son in his place, but it was all in vain. In response, Benjamin clasped his hands and pinned him in the man's head against the table. Said, if you don't want me to smash your jaw through this table right now and have you count every single one of your teeth, then my advice to you is to pack up and mat. And remember, if you have anything to say against me anywhere, I'll be responsible for a copy. I got nothing to lose. That evening, a group of cons surrounded Ethan in the hallway, not even allowing him to go to his room. The men aggressively reminded him that it was time to vacate the apartment, and realizing that Ethan had no other choice but to leave his own home, he left in what he was wearing, taking only the bare necessities with him. Why don't you go to the police? Asked the swollen homeless man with a battered eye. As they sat together in the abandoned house where Ethan had come to spend the night, look at me. What this life has brought me to. Until a few years ago, I was a normal man. If it wasn't for that damned bitch and her crazy mother, they wouldn't have driven me out of the apartment. I would have lived happily ever after. I didn't see that I had a snake on my neck. And if I were you, I wouldn't even think about it. Your boy's in jail, and you're just being a jerk. But Ethan didn't heed the advice of his new acquaintance. He realized that even if the police obliged Benjamin to let him back into the apartment and behave himself, there might come a moment when they wouldn't be able to get there in time. The abandoned house became a shelter for the man for many years. Here he slept, cooked together with his comrade in misfortune on a carefully built fire and washed. During his years of wandering, Sam managed to find a nearby well from where he regularly brought water to the house. You're lucky to have met me at all, Sam exclaimed. You've just moved in. There are 2 other people living with us too. One of them got out of jail for a man who was doing time, and he divorced her behind her back. The second one was kicked out of the apartment by her mother when she was still a teenager, as soon as she turned 18. First time she worked in some brothel, and then the fan on the enough, and was out of business. That's how we live. Ethan hasn't even tried to talk to his son, and hasn't seen him since he threw him out of the house. When investigators told the man that Benjamin was now leading a normal life, Ethan became very upset. He found it hard to accept that his son had not even tried to find him to help him in any way over the years. He didn't know how much Benjamin had to go through before he could pull himself together and get his life back on track. Ethan's heavy musings were interrupted by Adriana's voice. What are you thinking about? She asked. Did something else happen? No, not at all, the man replied. It's okay, it's just me. After Adriana left, Ethan sank back into his thoughts. Once you're fully recovered, we'll have to put you in a shelter, the policeman said. I have already contacted the people who supervise people like you, help them get back on their feet and start a new life. Wait, the man interrupted him. You said my son has become a normal person. Then why the orphanage? Maybe I could come home. For the first time in a long time, Ethan seriously considered it. Until now, he hadn't been ready to face his son. But now, after everything he'd been through, he really wanted to go home. He had absolutely no desire to go to any orphanages. Do you understand the situation here? The investigator answered thoughtfully. The thing is that it will take time to restore your documents, as well as to confirm that you are you. It will take time, because officially you don't exist. How not? Ethan was stunned. What do you mean? What are you talking about? I don't understand anything. Calm down, you mustn't be nervous. Your son, to put it mildly. A year after you disappeared, he declared you dead and the apartment you once lived in is now his. It would take some time for the court to overturn the decision, and you would be officially alive again, so to speak. Ethan was shocked by what he heard. He couldn't believe that his son had planned everything in advance to take possession of his apartment. This was an even bigger blow to the man than when Benjamin had thrown him out of the house like a dog a few years ago. Then he was sure that his son was just not in his right mind, and sincerely sympathized with him for all that had happened. But now he couldn't get his head around what was happening. Ethan couldn't believe that he had raised such a monster. But the criminal case, of course, was continued by the investigator. You were attacked after all? We can't let this go unchecked. We have to investigate. You, as soon as all the issues with the documents are resolved, write a statement. Naturally, we've already started an investigation. Your statement will only identify you as the victim. Where is my son now? Ethan asked. Who is he and what does he do? According to the information we've been able to get, he owns several small installation services. It's not a chain, but 3 small outlets. His official profits aren't that big, but I'm pretty sure there are hidden profits. For a man with his background, that's pretty decent. You realize that most ex-cons go down very quickly and never get back up. But he did manage to get off his knees. Every day Ethan got better and better. The man was recovering very quickly, which could not but please the doctors and nurses. But Ethan's moral state left much to be desired. He could not think of anything but to see his son as soon as possible. After so many years, he wanted very much to look into the eyes of Benjamin, who had not only lifted him higher, brought him back from home, but also sent him to the other world. Rising from his knees, Ethan pondered to himself and felt outright anger at this. The man couldn't imagine thinking of his son in that way. I hear you're going to be discharged soon, Adriana said when she came to visit Ethan again. That's so great. I'm so happy for you. Happy about what? Betty, the man asked back. His voice sounded aloof, indifferent, doomed, and the girl realized something was wrong. Ethan, let's be honest. Why do you keep beating around the bush? Aren't you sick of it? I've offered to help you many times. Not only are you refusing me, but you're hurting me with your mistrust. Well, please tell me what happened, and I'll try to help you in any way I can. I don't want to go to the orphanage, Ethan whispered quietly. I'd rather go straight back to my basement. At least Sam's there. Other people who are as destitute as I am, but at least they're familiar to me. I don't want to go to the shelter. I can imagine how many people are there, what's going on. The storm. The man wrinkled his nose. For several years of wandering, he had gotten used to everything and to the lack of food, warmth, at least some human conditions for sleeping. But the one thing he had never been able to accept as normal was the vile stench that the downtrodden vagrants had brought with them. He had always been grateful to fate that, unlike the rest of the homeless, he had always had the opportunity to have a proper wash be. They were rarely warm, but to avoid exuding the repulsive stench of vagrancy, Ethan contented himself with their cold. How long do they put you in there for? Adriana asked. Of course, for a long time, Ethan replied with a sigh. If not forever, there's no telling what will happen to me. I'll escape from there anyway. I'll find a way and run. I don't think anyone's watching us out there. Who'd want us as derelicts? I can't. I'll be much better off in this abandoned house I've spent all these years in. That same day, Adriana asked her mother for the keys to her grandmother's old country house, which, although a few hundred kilometers away from civilization, was quite livable. Why do you need them? The woman asked sternly. I decided to go for a rest. No, I need it for business, Adriana replied. Mom, please don't ask any more questions. Give me the keys. I have as much right to visit Grandma's old house as you do, but you haven't thought about it for years. And then suddenly you remembered. Mom, I'm not going to argue with you now. Just give me the keys. Adriana managed to persuade her mother to give her the keys. In return, she promised not to come home for a week, which suited Betty, who only dreamed of her daughter disappearing. And it would be nice if it was for a long time, or better yet, forever. Thank you, Ethan said, barely holding back tears. There's water there. There's a big well right by the house. Adriana smiled. When she heard that the man not only refused to go to the orphanage, but that he was going so far away, the investigator became wary. No, of course you are not a criminal, and have every right to go wherever you want, he said, when he once again came to Ethan at the hospital to clarify some of the details of the attack. But maybe you'll think it's a long way to go, and we'll call you in. And more than once. Without coaxing me, the man answered. I've made up my mind. I'll stay in this house until everything is settled. Water and a comfortable bed are all I need now. After walking Ethan to the bus to the village, Adriana gave him some money. Here you go, she said, handing the man an envelope. This is for the first time. There is a small store in the village. Can you buy your own food? There's no stove in the house, but as they say, you're used to it. Ethan wept. He hadn't expected the girl to be so kind and merciful. Adriana mentally thanked herself for putting things off. She couldn't imagine how she would live now if she didn't have a penny to her name. The girl realized that normal money in a kiosk with things cannot be earned, and savings sooner or later will run out. It was necessary to seriously think about how to live further. But at that moment, Adriana did not want to think about such serious things. Yes, I forgot to ask, Anna said. You sure you weren't offended that I couldn't take you in the car? Oh, come on, said Ethan. What could there possibly be to talk about? You've done so much for me that people who are related to each other don't do for each other. And you're a stranger to me. When 2 months later Adriana arrived at the old village house, she was stunned to see that it was completely different from the wreck in which her grandmother and her grandmother had lived out their lives. Wow! What? Exclaimed the girl, seeing the new porch. How did you manage to do it? Where did you get the materials? Yes, it is so, the man waved away. It's just the beginning. There is still a lot of work to be done. It would be good to cover the roof too. But I haven't found where to get it yet, and he's putting the materials away. Yes, I was walking around the village and suddenly I see a whole pile of boards and logs lying around, probably left over from the builders. So I decided not to waste any time and get to work right away. I can't just sit here idly. The few neighbors who still lived in the village admired Ethan. What kind of a man have you brought us, Kalinka? Clara from the house across the street said, golden hands. He not only builds houses for himself, but also helps us all with repairs. I wish I had such a man in the house. I answered without undressing, interfering in the conversation. You're old and sick. You should think about men. It's time to cook dinner and take care of your grandchildren. They lived in the village all year round and had long ago gotten used to the fact that loneliness brightened only by grandchildren coming for the summer, which parents every year sent to their grandmothers to rest. Life in the village was hard, and no one was excited about it. Ethan's appearance gave the locals a small but hopeful hope that someday not only the neighbors living in the heart of the village would be able to fix up their shacks, but also they, the simple people from the farm, who could not get money from their children to build new houses. How will it be repaired? Come and visit with your mom, Ethan said with a smile. All he could think about was that he had to go into town next week to see if the investigator had met Benjamin. No thanks, Kathy joked. My mom's not a cottage dweller. She's a bit of a, how can I put this delicately? Anyway, never mind. At that moment, the girl seriously thought that she would not mind to live for a while in the dacha away from her mother. Communication with which eats outlined so much that she was ready to run away anywhere, only not to see her. Sometimes it seemed to Adriana that she had long ago become accustomed to the woman's constant grudging waggishness, but it was only an illusion. In fact, the girl was still hurt by her mother's cold, indifferent, and sometimes cruel attitude to her. A trip to the son of Ethan investigator did not give anything. Unfortunately, I cannot please you with anything, he said thoughtfully, when the man came to talk. When he rang the bell at the apartment, the door was opened by a complete stranger who grumbled to himself that Benjamin had not lived here for a long time, but was renting the apartment. They asked him if he had any complaints or questions. When they heard a negative answer, they immediately shut the door. The investigator did not ask Ziltsov for documents. It was also familiar that he didn't want to do any additional work. Who knows who lives where, he thought to himself. But when he arrived at Benjamin's new address, he too failed. The man who opened the door didn't even understand at first what was wanted from him, so he was rude and refused to talk to the investigator. I've been in a bind for a long time, exclaimed Benjamin. I don't understand what you want here. I've checked in for the last few years, I haven't committed even the slightest offense. What could the police possibly have against me? We found your father, the investigator replied. He was injured, but he has recovered, and now we are working on restoring his documents. When all the formalities are settled, he'll be registered back in your apartment, and you'll have to evict the tenants because your father will be living there. At that moment, Benjamin wanted to fall through the ground, but he tried his best to pretend that this news was shocking to him. What father? What do you mean? He asked in surprise. My father hasn't been alive for years. I don't know what you're talking about. You must have gotten something mixed up. No, Benjamin, I'm not confused. The investigator answered sternly. Your father is alive and relatively healthy now, and you have to accept that, whether you want to or not. Benjamin had not thought of his father since he had kicked him out of the house. It was only a few months after that the man realized that he had to get out of the situation he was in. Otherwise, he was going to end up back in jail. It was not easy to evict his friends from the apartment. They didn't want to leave. A word. Why are you so surprised and offended? Asked the Brotherhood when he increasingly started talking about the fact that they need to find a new place to live. But where are we going? Think about it. We don't even have anywhere to go. But Benjamin didn't care. He could no longer stay under the same roof with people who made illegal substances in the kitchen and continued the robbery. After all, the man understood where they were getting the money from and did not want to be dragged into the pile of the case. When the situation went to the extreme, he remembered about his father's stash, where he kept his savings for a rainy day. When the gang left for another case, Benjamin removed an old rug from the floor and, after removing some rocket boards, took out a bag of money. That same day, he changed the locks on the apartment, and when the gang came home, they found that the door would not open for them. A real scandal broke out. But you're a Benjamin freak, shouted the men all the way up the stairs, the workers kicking at the door. I should have had you, you rat, sewed up in the zone. How we didn't recognize your kind before. You don't leave your Benjamin, don't abandon their own. And you screwed us like we were the last suckers. Hold on, we're not going to let it go. They tried to break down the door, but hearing the noise, the neighbors called the police, who prevented them from doing so. The same day, all the honest company was taken to the police station, where they had to explain why they violated public order and behaved in such a way. We from this goat almost real new terms not to get, reasoned the fratva on the way from the police. But if he gets caught again, it's a tree. Don't get so hot, answered the tall and clean man, who was always in charge in their company and enjoyed authority and respect. The investigators clearly told you, the fool, that if we get caught on anything again in the near future, we will definitely go back to the zone. What do we want? It's easier for us to just leave this asshole alone. Life will punish him. Benjamin spent a few days locked up, not even looking out the windows. He was very much afraid of the revenge of his former friends, who were capable of anything. And only when Benjamin realized that no one was watching him and no one was on duty under the windows, he began to leave the apartment and live a normal life. The money in his father's stash was not so much, but much more than he expected. After a month of unsuccessfully looking for work, Benjamin found some premises that could be rented as automobile workshops, and, having paid the rent for them, started working. He himself was surprised at how easy it was to sell his services online, marking the first serious money he earned. He scoffs at himself in the past and at those potential employers who, one after another, parroted him like a parrot and answered him. I'm sorry, but we can't hire someone with a criminal record. It's not allowed. In a year, he felt like a horse, and in 2 years, he was able to save up for a small apartment. Of course, it wasn't exactly what he'd dreamed of. But since Benjamin had an additional income from renting out his father's apartment, who by that time had already been officially recognized as dead, life did not seem so hopeless. I am going to sell the apartment strictly and uncompromisingly, Benjamin told the investigator. So, unfortunately, no one will be able to live in it. At the moment, I am the sole owner by law, and no court can add anyone to me just like that. You're wrong, the investigator replied, because your father is alive. The court will cancel the fact of recognizing him dead, and after that he will have every right to restore his rights to the property, which he lost by the fact of his death. So, unfortunately, I am the one who has to disappoint you. If your father was the owner of the apartment, Then I have to disappoint you. He will not only be able to register in it, but also to become the owner again." Benjamin was having a completely empty conversation because he knew all this before the investigator came and tried to do everything to make sure that his father never surfaced anywhere. He probably didn't know Ethan was alive, but he guessed by calling his old acquaintance from the zone who had extensive connections and could help him find out the information he needed. Benjamin found out about how and where his father lived. In general, as far as I know, and so rumor has it, among the fraternity said that you should not help your forefathers, said Tufa. We have even all the guys in Simple, but you take into account the mail works well. All the rumors immediately spread. Listen, but don't be boring, Benjamin exclaimed back. I asked you for money, and I gave it to you. You did it, and we parted ways. And all this stuff a la bros, what do you care about them? We met in the zone, did time together. You may never see them again. Do their opinions matter that much to you? No, I mumbled. What you don't realize is that whoever grabbed the first picture has the second one coming up. Believe me, my friend, it seems to you that if you didn't come back right away, you'll never come back again. The zone's a drag, and you gotta keep good relations with your own to keep things from going bad. I'm not going back to prison, Benjamin said flat out. That's why I don't give a damn about all these internal relationships. You need help. I asked for it. I paid for it. Thanks for not saying no. Dismissed. Don't say no. Oh, don't you dare. Benjamin warned Tufa and shook his hand and left to study the information he had given him. So, that's how Daddy is. Can you help me? Benjamin thought to himself. But it is better no one will look for it. Having found an abandoned house, the route of which was described in all details on a separate piece of paper, Benjamin began to carefully observe it. Damn it! It went through his head when he realized he couldn't even recognize his own father. All these hobos look alike. There's a whole group of them. I'll waste the whole day and never get anywhere. He decided to do something else. The next day, Benjamin dressed as a vagrant and went to the market. Every now and then, the town's homeless people came there to ask for food. Noticing in the crowd these very hobos he had seen near the house, Benjamin approached them and gently asked about Ethan. The women turned out to be crooked, immediately told the stranger who Ethan was and how to find him. And they didn't even ask why he was asking. Who is this? Asked Sam, seeing some vagrant walking away from them. What did he want? Nothing. They shrugged it off. He was asking who else he could borrow from. He's been on the street for a while. He's got nowhere to live and he's hungry. So why didn't you invite him to us? The homeless man was surprised. We got to catch up with the man, help a friend. Let's get out of here. Benjamin quickly ran out of the market and jumped into an old used car. Drove home. He watched the ruined house for 3 whole days. It was important to the man to get a moment when there would be no vagrants around and Ethan would be alone. And when Benjamin finally got that moment, he followed the man who was heading into town that day to the clothing market. Ethan usually went there alone, and as soon as he was able to get the sellers to give him something not only for himself, but for all his brothers and sisters in misfortune, he left immediately. That day he never made it to the market. Benjamin took the opportune moment to get close to the man. After stabbing him several times, ran away. He covered his face, so Ethan would never remember what the man who almost took his life looked like. Nor would he recognize his son. Benjamin had changed too much since the last time they'd seen each other. By the way, I keep forgetting to ask you, why did you take my keys to the cottage? Who are you crying to there? Adriana did not expect her mother to start this conversation. The girl was sure that it would be enough for Betty that she had fulfilled her arrangements. The day Adriana asked her mother for the keys to the cottage, she promised her to go away for a few days. At first, Adriana had planned to go to her grandmother's old house to look around and clean it up. But then she realized she wouldn't be able to do that. Her boss wouldn't let her go so easily. The woman was just about to go on vacation, and to herself, Adriana thanked fate that she was so lucky. She could sleep in the back of the store without having to explain to the owner why she didn't go home after work. Why the question, Mom? Adriana wondered. I thought we agreed on everything. I want to know who lives in my house. Betty replied. By the way, I have every right to know. Or should I go there myself? You're at work 24 hours a day. Where are you going all of a sudden? Nothing. How am I supposed to know what's going on over there? Maybe you let some homeless people live there. You're a good girl. It's a shame about the plum. Who knows you? Adriana tried her best to change the subject, but it was as if her mother insisted that she tell her who lived at the cottage. The girl found nothing better than to lie, but when she saw her mother's reaction, she realized she didn't believe her. A friend of mine lives there, Adriana said. She's separated from her husband and has nowhere to go. But don't worry, she'll be gone soon. What am I talking about? Betty exclaimed. So your friend doesn't have any parents? Or the relationship is so bad that they don't want to let their own daughter in a difficult situation? Mom, let's not get you started. You asked, I answered, and we'll leave it at that. Adriana had a day off that day, and she was going to go to the cottage again to visit Ethan, who had already settled there in a short time. The man was growing to like country life, and the last thing he wanted was to get into a fight with his son over the apartment. He did not yet know what Benjamin had done. Oh, that hurts, Adriana exclaimed as she fell on the road to the house, right on the board spread on the road. The girl was sure that the workmen had simply forgotten to remove the chunks of ice from the path, and she had not expected that there was a whole pile of wood with nails underneath. After a few minutes, she realized with horror that the pain was only getting worse. She couldn't get up or move her leg. After sitting on the ground for about half an hour, Adriana cried with hopelessness. If she could make it home, it would only be by crawling. After waiting for the girl around 2, Ethan became worried. He tried unsuccessfully to call Adriana, but the caller was unavailable. What the hell, she thought to herself, wiping away her tears. The phone was dead. I don't know why it would be so fast, though. After all, I stabbed it just before I left the house. My leg is killing me, and I'm sitting here like an idiot. And there's no one to call for help. There's no one in the neighboring houses. Okotsk is too far away. She tried to crawl on the ground, but her feet were even more irritated against the stiff grass. Every movement reverberated in Adriana's body with an intense pain that she could do nothing about. Closing the house, Ethan set off for the village, and after 15 minutes he reached the spot where Adriana was lying on the ground. Oh my, he exclaimed, approaching the girl. What happened? Did you fall? I seem to have broken my leg. Through tears muttered the girl. I can't walk, I can't even move my leg. Ethan took the girl in his arms and carried her into the house, calling for help from Clara, who had worked as a nurse in her younger days, and asked her to do something to make Adriana feel better. Ooh, she said thoughtfully. And by the defeated look on the woman's face, Ethan realized that things were not good at all. She needs to be taken to the emergency room right away. She has a fever. We have a local paramedic, but I don't think he'll be able to help. I don't think there's anything he can do. I picked up the phone. Clara immediately dialed Fedorovich's number and, hearing his loud mats into the receiver, realized that the man was clearly unhappy with the situation she had described to him. Don't rant, but tell me if you can come to the farm, shouted into the receiver. That girl is very young. A fracture. Why are you yelling? I'm telling you, it's definitely a fracture. I wasn't born yesterday, I've been a nurse for years. After hanging up the phone, Clara smiled, and Ethan immediately realized that the paramedic would be here soon. What a bunch of young people these days, Rick exclaimed as soon as he stepped through the door. There's no escape from them. They always go for a walk somewhere and then lie chained to the bed with broken legs. Stop talking. Fedorovich shouted at the man. Clara, can you put a cast on? And you do not shut my mouth. I can do it, he replied. But she still has to go to the hospital. However, I'll drive her to the nearest town. I'll take her to the nearest town. That's the way to go. Not to leave such a young, beautiful girl with an invalid. It's just not human. How long will I be here? Adriana asked excitedly when she was brought to the hospital. She still felt a terrible pain in her leg that she couldn't do anything about. I think at least a month, replied the doctor. You had a very unlucky fall. You should be more careful. Thanks for the advice, the girl replied wryly, trying to hide her indignation. The cell phone was still allowed, and she so needed to make a call. As soon as Ethan entered the room, Adriana immediately asked him for his cell phone. I have to call my mom, she said. I'm supposed to be home in 3 days, so I'll be in the hospital for the next month. Will she worry? Of course, of course. Betty, the man replied. Here. Holding out his cell phone to her, he left the room. Adriana was not able to reach her mother the first time. Only after she sent Betty a text message saying that she was the one trying to call her from this number, the woman called back, "Why?" from a left number. "So you lost your cell phone?" cried Betty into the phone. "No, Mom," answered Adriana. "I have the phone with me, but I don't have a charger. It's dead. I left the charger at home. Not a moment's peace." "You," the woman wailed. "You're always in trouble. So why are you calling? But I left the charger at home. I wasn't going to call you these days." I begged at the dacha. "What do I care? You're not a little girl. You'll figure it out on your own. You didn't have to call." "Mom, I'm not coming home for a few days. Not in the next few weeks either. I broke my leg at the hospital." "Where? Where did you say that again? I've heard it many times." "Mom, please stop being sarcastic. Did you hear everything?" "In the hospital. I'm in the city hospital, which is in the small town next to the village. They brought me here." Betty only sighed heavily and, after a few minutes' silence, said, "I'm going to your dacha today. That's enough of this. Let your friend go either to her parents, if she has them, or rent an apartment. In general, let her do what she wants. And you? I'll have a separate conversation with you." Adriana tried to argue with her mother, but by the time she started to speak, Betty had thrown the phone down. She was furious. Her mind was spinning with all sorts of thoughts. Tossing the essentials into her bag, Betty headed for the bus stop. "Ethan, is Mom coming today?" said Adriana when the man returned to the room. "I tried every way I could to talk her out of it, but she wouldn't go through with it. When she found out I was in the hospital, she was so furious. A nightmare. Anyway, be prepared for her visit." "No problem," she grinned. The man replied. "That you lie there with such a face, as if it were some kind of tragedy. It's no big deal. Well, we'll come home, see how I rebuilt, rejoice." "Why not?" Adriana didn't want Betty to come, but there was nothing she could do to influence her. It was evening when the woman stood outside the house with her bag, and when she saw the man on the porch, she could hardly contain her emotions. She quietly knocked from the house to find out what was really going on at the dacha all this time. And when she heard the woman's stories, she became furious. "You mean they are?" Betty muttered under his breath. "How awful. He's old enough to be her father, Betty." Clara said, "I've never held a candle to it, so I'm not going to say anything. But this guy's been here a long time. He's a good man. You repaired the house, and by the way, all made with his own hands from improvised materials that he found. That's what I mean, man. Not like the young men of today. They can't even hammer a nail." Saying goodbye to her neighbor, Betty quietly approached the house. She hoped to enter it unnoticed, to warm something heavy on the head of an elderly man who lives in her house and to whom her daughter regularly goes for some unknown reason. But the woman could not remain unnoticed, for Ethan knew of her visit and was ready for it. "Good evening," said the man, approaching the woman from behind and putting his hand on her shoulder, causing Betty to shudder and jerk to the side. She was ready to scream and tell Ethan what she thought of him, but when she turned and saw his face, she was stunned. "You mumbled," and "It can't be. What are you doing here?" Stepping away from the woman, he turned on the light and couldn't believe his eyes either. "What a meeting," he exclaimed. "Who would have thought that you and I would see each other after all these years?" "My eyes have not seen you," she said harshly. "Get out of my house, and I don't want you here again, and I don't want you anywhere near Adriana. I forbid you." Seeing Betty's reaction, Ethan realized that he'd been right in the assumptions he'd made in his head within seconds of seeing Adriana's mother's face. "Can't we just talk like normal adults?" Smiling, he asked. "Betty, seriously, please don't act like a hurt little kid. I'm sure that since fate has brought you and I together again, and under such unexpected circumstances, we have much to discuss. You're an asshole without a leg," the woman exclaimed, sitting down on her grandmother's old sofa. "Serves you right. Life has avenged everything on you. What have you got now, Nikolai? No yard. How I've hated you all these years. You'd know you're the kind of freak you'd never find in the whole world, even if you tried hard enough." For a moment, Betty thought back to 20 years ago, when she was alone with her little daughter in her arms. It had been the hardest time of her life and one she would never forget. "Betty, what kids?" Ethan exclaimed in surprise when he found out about the pregnancy. "You know I'm not a free man. I already have a son I'm raising. I don't need another ballast. And I have a complicated relationship with my wife. She's on the verge of divorce. And if she finds out about you, it's scary to imagine what will happen. There's got to be a way to solve this problem. It's not that hard now. But you and I don't need to have a child together. Neither you nor I want one." Betty slapped Ethan in the face and proudly disappeared from his life. He never sought her out again. She'd been a bone in his throat for a long time. But he did not dare to leave Betty, nor did he dare to leave his wife. Everything happened on its own. But even after the divorce, he didn't keep in touch with Betty. He was too tired of women, of their endless complaints and reproaches. Ethan devoted his whole life to raising his son. Never even knew he had a daughter. "So how did I know you'd decide to keep the baby anyway?" he exclaimed. "I thought you left me, and then you'd figure it out on your own." "I didn't think that. For some reason I didn't," Betty screamed. "About what?" "That it was too late to do anything about it at that point. You didn't think about that." "When I found out I was pregnant, I was already pretty far along. Imagine, it happens. Not all women know they're pregnant right away. And you didn't think about anything? You didn't care about me or Adriana. That's the fate of the fiend. You're the one who set my daughter up with you, you asshole. She could have pulled someone else from the dead, but not you. I'll never see or hear from you again." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He was so confused that he couldn't say a word. When he found out that Adriana was his daughter, whom he had so cruelly and mercilessly abandoned, he was suddenly in unbearable pain. He had given his whole life for the good of his son, who had grown up not only ungrateful, but had betrayed his own father. The dastardly Vile had done to him. At the time, Ethan had thought it undeserved, but now he realized that in this way fate had avenged himself for his low and despicable act. He had gotten what he deserved. "Yes, it was my fault," he said. "Guilty. And what am I to do now for the rest of my life? What am I supposed to do now? You can't get the past back. At least not you, not me. They haven't invented a time machine yet. So now we have to look to the future. If by chance I met Adriana, why not start over? Especially since we have a great relationship. Adriana is an adult, and she should decide for herself who she can and can't socialize with." Their conversation was interrupted by the phone ringing and seeing the investigator's number pop up on the screen. Ethan immediately picked up the phone. "I have some very important news for you," he heard a familiar male voice in the receiver. "Could you come to my place?" "How urgent is it?" Ethan asked. "I'm just having some serious family problems. It would be nice to postpone or reschedule. Is it about your son?" The next morning, Ethan arrived in town and went straight to the police station. When he saw the serious, sad face of the investigator, he realized that something had happened, and when he learned that his son had been detained, he was shocked. "But how could it be?" asked the man, barely holding back tears. "It turns out that he knew that I was alive and did not even try to help me. On the contrary, he wanted to kill me and planned it so well." He couldn't get his head around what he'd just heard from the investigator. All his life, Ethan had been convinced that he had brought up a good, kind boy who had simply stumbled, confused, gone down the wrong road. And it turned out that Benjamin grew up cynical and calculating, insolent, ruthless, and unscrupulous. Ethan needed time to get over all this. We found in his belongings and a knife, and even things he had purposely stripped and smeared with mud to pretend he was homeless, the investigator continued. Of course, he washed and laundered everything, but the marks still remained. And that's more than enough evidence. We don't need any more. Can I see my son? Ethan asked, after listening to the investigator. Are you sure you want to see him? Yes, I'm sure, the man said firmly. I want to see my son one last time. Ethan realized that this was their last meeting with Benjamin. He would never change, no matter how much he wanted to believe Benjamin. He couldn't anymore. The man didn't have the moral strength for it. And I found a daughter, Ethan said. When Benjamin was brought out of his cell. Can you imagine after all these years? It's such a long old story, though. You probably wouldn't be interested. Are you right? Benjamin answered indifferently. I'm not interested in hearing about how you traded your own son for some girl you've known for a week. Why did you do that? It doesn't matter. Tell me something. You've started to live a normal life. You were doing well. Why did you do all that? Did you do it for the apartment? I don't believe it. You could have bribed your way into a decent place. I'm sure it would have been possible in a few years with your income. You weren't poor, were you? Why? Notice, I'm not even asking why you, when you kicked your natives out of the apartment, got smart, started to live normally, did not look for me to help me. That's a rhetorical question. What I want to know is, why did you find me on purpose and try to kill me? I've devoted my whole life to you. I've done everything for you. To buy an apartment, you say? After many years, Benjamin snapped at me. Have you even seen what I bought for myself? What I had enough for, considering that I worked like an ox? I haven't. Well, why don't you go and see it if you haven't? The cage is 1 meter by 1 meter and there's nowhere to spit. You got a 3-bedroom? Yeah, in this shithole. And it's not the best real estate, and it's not something to aspire to. But it's never a waste. You and your mother haven't cared about me your whole life. She doesn't care at all. You've been a good father for years. The truth is, you all don't care about me. After these words, Ethan realized with horror that he had nothing more to say to his son. He silently left the cell and, after saying goodbye to the investigator, drove to Adriana's hospital. Is Ethan really my birth father? Adriana exclaimed, who had missed her dad all her life, his attention and care, even though she had never known her father. Deep down, the girl believed that one day the day would come when her father would be found. She was so happy that she even forgot about her sore leg. At that moment, absolutely everything became so unimportant. Yes, Adriana, yes. Betty nodded affirmatively. Ethan, your father. There's just one more thing I want you to know. Oh, Mom, I don't want to hear anything. Adriana waved it away. If you want to tell me about your and Dad's past, you'd better not. I don't care what happened between you or why you separated. All that matters to me is what's happening now. And Ethan and I, who we met, happen to have a great relationship. And I want not only to keep it, but to grow it. Betty realized it was useless to talk to her daughter. Happiness covers the logs, eyes, and as long as it will be so, she will not want to hear anything. The woman left the room in silence and didn't even notice Ethan following her out. Betty, I want you to listen to me, please. She's right, he said. Let's not go into these details of our past. But I'm sorry if I can't help it. Forgive me if you can. Oh, of course I was wrong. But it won't do anyone any good if we go on reminiscing forever. Well, the one who remembers is the one who's out of sight. And the one who forgets, both out, the woman replied. Do what you want. You don't mind socializing. You're welcome. She's your daughter. You have, as she put it, a wonderful relationship. I won't interfere. However, after a month, Adriana was discharged from the hospital, and she moved with her father to the country house, where they continued to build a house. After the verdict, Benjamin Ethan returned his apartment, which he immediately reissued to Adriana. When the girl informed her mother about it, she did not express much joy. I don't understand your jubilation, to be honest, Betty said. He hasn't raised you all your life, hasn't helped you a penny. That's why this apartment is not a gift. It's him paying off his debts to you. Adriana didn't argue with her mother. She was too old to understand what Betty Igor did not like, to cherish her resentments. And no one has the right to interfere with her in this. The girl rented out her father's apartment, and with the proceeds of the money they finished repairs in the dacha house, which became exemplary for the villagers. After such work, neighbors one after another offered Ethan to help them with repairs and construction and promised decent money for it. After 2 years, the man was able to save enough money to pay for Adriana to study at medical school, which she had always dreamed of. But in the intervening time, the girl realized that she did not want to be a doctor. I want to help people, but it doesn't have to be medicine, she told her father when he informed his daughter that he had saved money for her studies. Most likely, I will study to be a social worker or some such specialty. And I don't think I'll be able to pass the medical exams. It's been so many years since high school, when I studied all these specialized subjects there, and I've never had an aptitude for them. After thinking it over, Adriana went to study psychology and managed to pass on a budget. "So, Daddy, can we keep the money?" she said joyfully when she found out about her enrollment. "We'll put up a new fence, for example." "You're such a clever girl," Ethan exclaimed joyfully and hugged his daughter tightly. Every day he thanked fate for the fact that they had met by chance.